The Ukrainian War is one of the most closely watched conflicts in modern history. But the raw numbers reveal a story that's far more chilling than you might think. What hidden patterns are emerging from the chaos? Could these numbers predict the future of this brutal war? Our military experts have been digging deep, and what they've uncovered is both shocking and sobering. Russia's illegal war in Ukraine has brought devastation on an unimaginable scale. The violence is staggering, but the numbers tells a story that the words alone cannot. 1,200 kilometers of front line, 150,000 homes reduced to rubble, entire cities obliterated. And the cost? The World Bank estimates it will take over $500 billion to rebuild what's been lost. As both sides dig in, this war has become a grueling battle of attrition with no end in sight. Each day grinds forward with no easy answers, only more destruction. In today's video, we're diving into the hard data that reveals the true scope of this conflict, from the shifting battle lines to the staggering humanitarian crisis. These statistics aren't just numbers, they're the key to understanding the war's ongoing impact and what might come next. Whether you're here to learn about military strategy or to grasp the human toll, this analysis will give you the insights you need. Let's dive in. 2.5 years ago, Russian forces shocked the world by launching Vladimir Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. One of their primary objectives was the swift capture of Kyiv, Ukraine's capital, in an attempt to destabilize and overthrow the Ukrainian government. Crossing through Belarus, the vanguard of a combined force of 360,000 Russian soldiers converged on Kyiv from the west and northeast. Despite initial gains in the encirclement of key suburbs, Ukrainian forces stood firm, employing guerrilla tactics, fortified defenses, and effective use of anti-tank weapons to stymie their overconfident foe. The Russian advance soon stalled. Logistical challenges, the underestimation of Ukrainian resolve, and the effective Ukrainian counterattacks forced Russian troops into retreat by early April 2022, marking a significant failure in Russia's strategy to decapitate the Zelensky regime in the war's opening phase. The war has since devolved into a prolonged, grinding struggle. As Russia refocused its military efforts on the eastern Donbass region and southern coast, the conflict has become characterized by intense, sustained artillery duels, trench warfare, and incremental territorial gains by both sides. Progress is measured in meters rather than miles. The Russian military, unable to achieve its initial objectives, resorted to relentless bombardments and exhaustion tactics, aiming to wear down Ukrainian forces and civilian infrastructure. Meanwhile, Ukraine, bolstered by Western military aid and intelligence support, adopted a strategy of strategic defense and localized counteroffensives, gradually reclaiming occupied territories, albeit at significant cost. Ukraine knew it would struggle from the start. Its campaign would unfold on a scale the world had not seen since the Second World War. The Ukrainian armed forces faced an enemy with a population 4 times as large as their own, an alleged superpower with 5 times as many armored fighting vehicles, more than 160,000 to Ukraine's 22,110, 3 times as many artillery pieces, 4,397 to 1,639, 5 times as many air defense systems, 1,760 to 81 for Ukraine. Well over 10 times as many aircraft and a navy, comparatively at least, that stood second to none in its own backyard. Ukraine worked hard since the initial 2014 Russian seizure of Crimea to modernize its military. They chose to mold it in the image of the West, with a trained reserve and Western-supplied combat units that consciously and incrementally jettisoned traditional Soviet doctrines. Since 2021, Ukraine has converted its military ranks to NATO standards. Ukrainian soldiers use Sir, with the addition of a military rank, rather than the more traditional comrade. It trains its forces to operate in self-contained brigades, each capable of solving problems in its area of responsibility. Starting the war with around 250,000 active-duty military personnel and 220,000 reservists, it's seen significant injections of Western air defense systems, tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, anti-tank weapons, small arms, and many other implements since 2022. The total amount of Western aid, both pledged and donated, is today fast approaching $400 billion. More on that later. How have both sides been attrited over almost 2.5 years of conflict? Estimates vary. By the end of 2023, Russia had lost the equivalent of 90% of its original invasion force. What that means is that out of an original force of 360,000, 315,000 have been killed or injured, with upwards of 70,000 killed, at least 45,000 of them killed in 2023 alone. Some suggest the number of fatalities could be at least twice as high. US intelligence officials, for example, claim that as many as 120,000 Russian troops have been killed, with 170 to 180,000 wounded, compared to nearly 70,000 Ukrainian troops killed and 100 to 120,000 wounded. Others place Russian manpower losses alone at upwards of 500,000. A recent report by the Atlantic Council put it best. To put these numbers in context, Russia's losses in the recent 4-month campaign for Avdiivka were greater than the Soviet Union suffered in its decade-long war in Afghanistan. There were more than 2,000 new Russian fatalities reported in just the last 2 weeks of July 2024 alone, and more than likely, the actual numbers are much, much higher. On August 5, 2024, Russia lost 1,180 soldiers in a single day, a decrease from a maximum of 1,262 in May, when Russian forces were conducting counter-offensive operations along the Kharkiv axis. These losses are frankly staggering, even if the statistics themselves remain fickle at best. Casualty estimates during ongoing combat operations are notoriously difficult to calculate, with both sides aggressively censoring their data. Still, if a recent report is to be believed, in Russia the number of obituaries is rising so fast that they can't keep up with them. In all, according to one insider, the increase in losses of Russian troops in recent months has been much more significant than expected. On the Russian side alone, more than 3,600 officers have been killed, a number that includes 424 with the rank of lieutenant colonel or higher. It's perhaps telling of the type of military Russia has built that analysts of the conflict claim it's expended 11,463 prison inmates killed on Ukraine's eastern front. The losses of military hardware and equipment have been somewhat easier to track, thanks to the revolutionary rise in the use of open-source intelligence, OSINT, a mode of analysis that utilizes a wide range of publicly available data, satellite images, social media posts, videos, and other digital footprints to offer a more immediate and nuanced view of the conflict. Oryx Pionkop, a Dutch open-source intelligence defense analysis website and research group, often referred to simply as Oryx, has been one of the best examples of meticulous OSINT use during the current war. Since 2022, Oryx has gained prominence for its comprehensive and independently verified list of destroyed, captured, and abandoned military equipment from both sides in the conflict. To date, Russia has lost 17,300 individual vehicles and other major pieces of military equipment. The breakdown is pretty sobering when cast against other conflicts of similar scale. 3,309 of these documented losses are Russian tanks, of which 2,264 have been destroyed outright, with another 522 captured, 367 abandoned, and 156 damaged. Russia has also lost 1,518 armored vehicles, including various models of BMPs, BTRs, and MT-LBVMs, along with 4,400 infantry fighting vehicles. Destroyed, captured, and abandoned armored personnel carriers amount to 477. There have been 271 lost infantry mobility vehicles, 284 command posts and communication stations, 535 engineering and logistics vehicles, to say nothing of 402 multiple rocket launchers, 394 towed and 802 self-propelled artillery pieces destroyed or lost. Russian air defenses have taken a significant hit as well, with 268 surface-to-air missile systems and dozens of expensive radar, jammers, and deception systems taken off the battlefield by Ukrainian forces. Ukraine, having taken significant losses to their own air force in the early stages of the war, has been able to deny Russia air superiority by knocking 122 aircraft and 140 helicopters off Russian rolls. This has been an amazing achievement considering that by March 2023, Ukraine's entire fighter fleet had been whittled down to a mere 69 aircraft, barely more than 3 fighter squadrons by NATO standards. Russian losses at sea have been even more eye-opening, considering the fact that Ukraine has been operating on a naval shoestring since the country's opening days, that is to say, basically lacking any navy to speak of. The fact that Russia has lost 26 naval ships and submarines to date, most of them to homegrown naval drones, uncrewed aerial vehicles, and US-provided long-range Army tactical missile systems, or ATACMS, belies the fact that this number proved significant enough to cripple Russia's once vaunted Black Sea Fleet. As of the summer of 2024, Ukrainian missile attacks have forced Russia to withdraw its entire fleet from its bases in Sevastopol. The math of the war at sea is revealing. Generally, but depending on the contract, each ATACMS missile has a hefty price tag of around $1.3 million and possesses a range in the ballpark of 190 miles. British-made Storm Shadow missiles have an even longer range and are twice as expensive. Previously, Ukraine claimed to have extensively damaged one of Russia's Kilo-class submarines in the Black Sea using a Storm Shadow missile. More recently, it claimed to sink a Kilo-class submarine using an ATACMS missile. The Rostov-on-Don submarine, for example, a $300 million investment, was thus taken out by a weapon 1/300th of the price. Ukraine is also using these weapons to destroy oil depots, port facilities, amphibious landing ships at dockside, and other investments, losses which have effectively rendered Russia's naval prospects functionally inactive for the foreseeable future. The financial asymmetry of Ukrainian naval warfare can be seen in the nature of drone warfare writ large as it's evolved throughout the conflict. As the war progressed, smart, low-cost drone technology has enabled Ukraine to counteract some of its most pressing disadvantages, that of manpower and its damaged military-industrial base, for example. "This is a war of drones," noted one Ukrainian political advisor. "They are a superweapon here." Notably, while the dollar-per-kill ratio is several orders of magnitude lower than other weapons, they also have a very high kill-permission ratio, as they target individual targets such as single soldiers or tanks, much more than the random death dealt by missiles and bombs targeting things like supermarkets or frontline physical defenses. Having been used to attack everything from Russian soldiers cowering in burnt-out hulls of destroyed tanks, the Kremlin, and everything in between, drones, both homemade and commercially produced, offer a viable alternative to far more expensive and technologically sophisticated military systems like fighter jets, tanks, and artillery. For the price of a single F-35 fighter jet, you can buy 55,000 Chinese-made DJI Mavic 3 drones, the chosen model currently employed by both Russian and Ukrainian forces. At $2,000 apiece, it doesn't matter whether they break or not. They're easy to maintain and even easier to jerry-rig with all manner of ordnance. Even if a fifth of these drones make it through to their target, you're looking at 10,000 confirmed kills, all for the price of a single F-35. Today, drones have become an essential strategic and offensive element of the war. Both sides employ assault drone companies, down to the brigade level. Drones in Ukraine vary in size from 12 centimeters to drones with wingspans over 15 meters. Quadcopters and other rotor drones are the most common, with larger armed systems like the Turkish-made Bayraktar TB2 causing significant damage in the early phases of the conflict, before Russian electronic warfare systems developed robust enough defenses to shoot them down. Ukraine claims it's losing 10,000 drones a month, yet by early 2024, there were as many as 200 independent companies producing cheap drones throughout the country to account for these losses. Domestic output is up 100 times higher than the first year of the war, with Ukrainian officials setting a target of 1 million drones to be produced in calendar year 2024, approximately double the amount of artillery shells furnished by the entire European Union in the same span. Recently, a coalition of 10 countries promised to supply another 1 million drones to Ukraine by February 2025. For their part, Russia has pledged to produce 2 million drones in 2024, importing thousands of Shahids and other drones from Iran. It's currently churning out upwards of 100,000 drones a month. With the introduction of autonomous AI-powered drones already seen on the battlefield in Ukraine, the potential of drones is expected to grow exponentially for the foreseeable future. Entire swarms of drones can be managed by just a few operators, and since these drones can navigate independently after a target is selected, electronic countermeasures that disrupt communication between drone and its operators are rendered moot. And what has Russia gained in more than 2.5 years of waging Putin's special military operation? While the strategic goals have varied, ranging from a pie-in-the-sky dream of bringing all of Ukraine into the influence of Russia to the more modest goal of laying claim to only those Russian-speaking areas in the east and south of the country, after 2 brutal winters and hundreds of thousands of casualties on both sides, by the end of 2023, Russia laid claim to 18% of Ukrainian territory. That compared with 7% on the eve of the war and 27% in the immediate aftermath of the invasion. Ukraine owes much of its success to date to Western military assistance. Russia's invasion unlocked the coffers of the West, with many eager to assist President Volodymyr Zelensky defending his own country against Moscow. A coalition of 54 countries, including all 32 member states of NATO and 22 other states, have donated military aid both individually as sovereign countries and actively via EU institutions. More than $118 billion in direct military aid to date has been donated to Ukraine. The United States has far eclipsed its European peers in the amount of money spent funding Ukraine's war effort, having directly spent over $55 billion in military assistance. Germany, the United Kingdom, Japan, and Canada follow with $16 billion, $14.3 billion, $9.9 billion, and $7.8 billion respectively. Total donations often don't tell the whole picture, however. Not all GDPs are created equal. With donations visualized as a percentage of GDP, smaller European nations top the chart, with Denmark, Estonia, Lithuania each donating 1.8, 1.7, and 1.4% each. Taken together, the entirety of the European Union institutions, along with the United Kingdom, Norway, Iceland, and Switzerland, have collectively allocated a total of 110.2 billion euros for Ukrainian use, about half of which has been earmarked for military use. It took longer than it should have for the West to donate its best weapons for Ukrainian use, and some might fairly argue that they're still holding back for fear of retaliatory escalation on Moscow's part. Yet the money set aside for Ukrainian use have made it possible to send a smattering of high-tech weaponry that's helped Ukraine defend itself. While the effectiveness of tanks on the battlefield has been largely offset by the ubiquity of cheap drones, Ukraine has received hundreds of donated tanks since 2022. Poland, far and above, leads the way, with 324 tanks donated, 270 of them older T-72s, recently supplemented with 14 cutting-edge Leopard 2A4s. With a monetary value of $599 million, only the United States has donated a more valuable tank package, albeit far fewer, having sent Ukraine just 45 overhauled T-72s and 31 far more expensive M1A1 Abrams tanks. The Netherlands ranks second in total tanks donated, with 104, 37 of them being older Leopard 1A5s and 7 Leopard 2A4s. Germany has donated just 18 Leopard 2s. These, however, the later A6 model. The United Kingdom donated just 14 Challenger 2 tanks. Far more significant was the United States' donation of 352 M2 Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, IFVs, fighting implements worth a monetary value that eclipses the $634 million spent on tanks by an extra $30 million. The Netherlands ranks second behind the US in donated IFVs, having donated 269 YPR 765s. Germany in third sent 140 Marder IFVs, with the Czech Republic, Denmark, and Greece each ranking behind them, having sent several hundred versions of the older Soviet-style BMP. Because of their ability to suppress fortified positions, move quickly, and transport and medevac entire squads to and from the battlefield, IFVs, far more than tanks, have proven their worth in the attritional quagmire that is the battlefield today. One of the most valuable weapons of the war is the venerable artillery piece. Some analysts estimate that up to 80% of all casualties in Ukraine have been caused by artillery. It currently takes Ukraine 75,000 artillery shells a month to maintain their active front line, or between 2,000 to 3,000 shells a day. That may not seem like a lot, but it is. To put that into perspective, as of March 2024, the defense industries of the entire United States and Europe together could only produce a little over 3,000 shells a day, or 1.2 million munitions annually. Russia, according to conservative estimates, is churning out 250,000 munitions a month, or somewhere in the ballpark of 3 million a year. To date, the United States alone has sent more than 3 million artillery shells to Ukraine. As a means of illustrating the importance of artillery in the overall conflict, it's telling that the monetary value of all artillery systems sent by the United States to Ukraine sits just under $1 billion, $977 million, surpassing the cost of tanks or IFVs by $300 million. Most of these have been the highly mobile and effective 155mm M777 howitzers, 142 to be exact, out of 201 total pieces. Part of Ukraine's problem is that each country donates the howitzers it currently has in stock. While many of them fire NATO and US standard 155mm shells, they all use different parts and consequently can be difficult to maintain. Well over half of the artillery systems donated by the United Kingdom, for example, ranked second in overall artillery donations with 78, are the British-built AS-90 self-propelled gun. Italy ranked third with 76 pieces donated, a number of FH-70 guns in use by several European, Arabic, and Asian nations. Estonia, notably, donated its entire inventory of FH-70 guns. Denmark and France donated 61 Caesar guns. Sweden sent 8 of its famed Archer howitzers. Germany and the Netherlands sent 40 PZH-2000s, 36 RCH-155s, and others. This only scratches the surface. Ukraine has found special use in Western Multiple Launch Rocket Systems, MLRS, longer-range missile systems which have been responsible for destroying untold millions worth of command and control equipment, aircraft, air defense systems, naval vehicles, and other expensive equipment. The United States sent 39 of its famed HIMARS systems at a monetary value of $588 million. The Czech Republic donated a dozen older RM-70s, while Norway sent 11 M270s. Germany 8 Mars 2 and HIMARS systems, and the UK, France, and Italy, each sending 6, 4, and 2 M270 systems respectively. While Germany seems to have lagged behind in its donations of military equipment compared to other countries, especially relative to its own GDP, it has led the way, far outstripping even the United States, in one crucial area: air defense. Germany on its own has donated over $4 billion worth of air defenses spread across 26 weapon systems. These include 24 Iris-T SLM systems and 2 Patriot systems. The Czech Republic and the United States have each sent 16 air defense systems, though these are not created equal. While the US has only sent 1 Patriot system, it's sent 3 NASAMS and 2 Hawk systems, 6 of the latter having also been donated by Spain. At the mercy of Russia's long-range cruise missiles, drones, and glide bombs, Ukrainian civilians rely on these air defenses to mitigate collateral damage and defend them on a daily basis. In the air, Ukraine is currently on track to receive 95 single-seat F-16A fighters and 2-seat F-16Bs from Belgium, Denmark, Norway, and the Netherlands, though some put the number closer to between 60 and 80. Many experts claim this number will hardly make a dent in the ongoing war, though it will provide Ukraine with better means of bolstering its own air defenses and a stronger pathway to someday integrate its military into the US and European defense and economic ecosystem. It would take somewhere in the ballpark of 12 fighter squadrons, according to a recent CSIS report, to achieve the air support needed for the war on the ground, with 4 squadrons primarily responsible for each core mission set: enemy air defense suppression, air interdiction, and defensive counter-air. How many fighters is that, you ask? 216 F-16s, with 18 per squadron. It would be hard for Ukraine to maintain, let alone supply and control, an air force of that size with its own industrial defense base. Most of its pre-existing supply chains used to repair, reconstitute, and sustain its existing air units either trace back to the old Soviet Union and no longer exist, or are now under Russian control. Yet the conferral of Western F-16s marks a significant start to the process of wresting back a modicum of aerial control in this long attritional war. The more Ukraine integrates itself into US and NATO supply chains, the easier it will be to sustain its effort over the long term. According to the Pentagon, 2 years of war have not come cheap for Russia. We've already discussed the human costs, but what about the economic impact? As of February 2024, 2 years of military operations inflicted $152 billion in direct damage to Ukraine, but it cost Moscow $210 billion in the process. As part of the economic sanctioning, Russia also lost $10 billion in paused arms sales. Many have claimed that Russia, having overhauled its entire economy onto a war footing, will easily be able to outpace Ukraine in a grinding war of attrition. With the congressional pause in US assistance earlier this year, it was hard to argue otherwise. Ukrainian forces struggled to maintain manpower, morale, and supplies in the field as Russian offensives intensified. Yet the numbers in Russia also tell an eye-opening story. 2.5 years since Putin launched his full-scale invasion, the humanitarian and economic costs have been exorbitant. To maintain its facade that the war is going well, Putin's government, for example, has ramped up its tactics of fear and repression, and the consequences are becoming increasingly dire. According to OVD Info, a human rights organization that tracks political persecution in Russia, there are currently 892 criminal cases against anti-war dissidents. And if that's not enough to alarm you, 19,855 people have been detained at anti-war protests. That's nearly 20,000 individuals standing up against the war, only to be met by brutal crackdowns. Now here's where it gets even more concerning. OVD Info's data shows a significant spike in politically motivated detentions since the invasion. Of the 3,626 people in Russia who have faced these prosecutions since 2012, more than a third, 1,305, have been in just the last 2 years. That includes 728 in 2022, 521 in 2023, and 56 so far in 2024. It's clear that the Kremlin is doubling down on fear. But why? The answer lies in the nature of political change in Russia. Historically, real change happens when 3 things align: a divided elite, a disaffected public, and a lack of fear. The Putin regime knows this, and it's doing everything in its power to keep fear alive and well. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has backfired in a big way, especially when it comes to natural gas and their place in the European market. By launching a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Russia has lost a huge chunk of its natural gas market share in Europe, and the financial hit is massive. Russia is projected to lose between $27 and $34 billion in 2024 alone, depending on gas prices. To put that into perspective, that's about the same amount Russia had planned to spend on education and healthcare this year, but instead, much of that money has been funneled into Moscow's brutal war effort. Now here's where it gets a bit ironic. Europe has been trying to phase out coal while staying competitive in the industrial world, which would have actually increased demand for Russian gas. If Putin had chosen to focus on economic prosperity instead of waging war, Russia could have been on track to export over 184 billion cubic meters of gas to Europe in 2024, and that's regardless of whether the Nord Stream 2 pipeline ever came online. But what really happened? Russia ended up shipping around just 72 billion cubic meters of gas in 2023, and that number isn't expected to change much this year unless new sanctions hit. These numbers really highlight Europe's unprecedented pivot away from Russian energy and urgent need for Europe to fully cut ties with Russian supply chains. But here's the kicker. Energy exports are still Russia's main source of cash to fund its war in Ukraine, with nearly a third of the country's revenues coming from oil and gas. Russia's tech sector has taken a similarly bad hit since 2022. That year alone, about 10% of Russia's IT workforce simply packed up and left the country, along with over 1,000 Western companies. That's a big deal. The IT sector has been a huge driver of the Russian economy, accounting for nearly a third of its growth since 2015. In response to this exodus, Moscow tried to keep its talent by offering lower income taxes and better mortgage rates. But guess what? Those incentives didn't work. More than 100,000 young, highly educated IT professionals still chose to leave, creating a massive talent gap. According to Russia's Minister for Digital Development, the country's IT sector now faces a shortfall of over 500,000 workers. But that's not all. The situation is even worse because of the exit of major Western tech firms like IBM, Intel, Microsoft, and others. Before the invasion, Russia's tech industry was heavily dependent on Western inputs, everything from semiconductors to operating systems. With sanctions in place, access to this critical technology has been severely limited, and the alternatives just aren't cutting it. Chinese tech, which Russia has turned to, has proven to be an imperfect and expensive substitute. So what does all of this mean for the future? Russia's tech sector is now cut off from global connectivity, research opportunities, and the critical technology it needs to compete on the world stage. If this trend continues, it's likely that Russia will fall behind other global powers like the US, China, and the EU. Before the war, Russia's annual inflation was around 9%, but in the first year of the conflict, it spiked to between 11% and 17.8%. After that, thanks to interest rate hikes by the central bank, inflation dipped as low as 2 to 3%, but it's been creeping back up, hitting 7.4% this January. Interest rates have been all over the place too. The central bank slashed rates from 20% down to 7.5% between March and September 2022, but they had to hike them back up to 18% by July 2024 to control inflation. Russia's financial risk has also exploded. Its credit default swap, CDS, risk premium shot up from around 200 before the war to a staggering 13,800. Beyond military spending, Russia's economy is feeling the strain from Western sanctions. The EU has imposed its 13th sanctions package, and over $320 billion of Russian central bank reserves are frozen by Brussels, the G7, and Australia. On top of that, 70% of Russian banking assets and over 20 billion euros in assets belonging to more than 1,500 people and entities are under sanctions. Russia's exports have taken a massive hit, dropping 28.3% to $425.1 billion last year, with exports to Europe plunging 68%. Imports have stayed relatively stable, but the overall picture is bleak. Since the war began, countless companies have pulled out of Russia, ending operations, investments, and partnerships, while many countries and sectors have imposed sanctions or suspensions. Meanwhile, Russia's defense budget keeps growing, making up 23% of the total government budget in 2023, up from 21% in 22 and 20% in 21. There are other alarming figures. These are, for example, 685 current suspects identified by the Ukrainian Office of the General Prosecutor as instigators of war and propagandists of the Kremlin. Collectively, the office has also charted 125,698 registered crimes of aggression and war crimes. It's completed war crimes trials against just 238 military personnel. Russia has inflicted an extremely disproportionate and staggering toll on Ukrainian civilians caught in the crossfire of war. A recent report from the International Rescue Committee (IRC) estimates that 4.6 million Ukrainians need humanitarian assistance this year, including 3.7 million who are internally displaced. The report also highlighted over 4,000 attacks on education facilities, 1,300 on healthcare, and the destruction of over 1.5 million homes. The UN has updated its forecast for Ukraine's reconstruction and recovery costs to around $486 billion, up from $411 billion last year. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. An area the size of Romania is now littered with landmines, and the explosion of the southern Novokakhovka Dam in June left 600,000 hectares of arable land without irrigation. The Kyiv-based Center for Economic Strategy (CES) reports that Ukraine's unemployment rate skyrocketed from 10% before the war to over 30% during the conflict, before settling at 17% now. Food insecurity has also been a huge concern, with hunger affecting up to 30.3% of the population at its peak. Trade has taken a massive hit too. Before the war, exports and imports were roughly balanced at $7.5 billion each in January 2022, but the trade balance plummeted into the negatives, sitting at minus $3.7 billion by December. Grain exports especially suffered, though they nearly bounced back to pre-war levels thanks to the Black Sea grain deal brokered by Turkey and the UN until Russia pulled out in July 2023. Inflation in Ukraine has been wild, spiking from 10% in January 2022 to 26.6% by October 22, before dropping to 4.7% now. The economy, after shrinking massively in 2022, showed signs of recovery in 23, with positive GDP growth in the second quarter and beyond. Looking ahead, Ukraine will need around $15 billion just for immediate reconstruction and recovery in 2024, according to the World Bank. The focus will be on mobilizing the private sector and restoring housing, energy, and transport infrastructure. Since the war began, direct damage has already reached nearly $152 billion, with the hardest hit sectors being housing, transport, commerce, energy, and agriculture. As we've seen, the conflict has had devastating impacts, not just in terms of human lives, but also on the economies, infrastructure, and future stability of both Ukraine and Russia. The numbers tell a stark story of destruction, resilience, and the far-reaching consequences of war. But these stats are more than just figures. They represent real people, communities, and nations facing unprecedented challenges. As the war continues, it's crucial to stay informed and understand the broader implications of what's happening on the ground. Thank you for watching, and if you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more in-depth analysis on global events. Stay tuned for more updates, and as always, let's keep the conversation going in the comments below. Now go and check out Analyzing the Power of Western Tanks in Ukraine, or click this other video instead.